Welcome everybody to a Q&A with Stephen Wilson and Miles Skarin. And we've got a number of questions that you guys have sent in on the chat and on social media. So let's get this Q&A started. So I'll start with Stephen. The concept of the overview effect is central to the project. What first inspired you to explore this phenomenon?
So I had a conversation with a very good friend of mine about this time last year, a guy called Alex Milas, who runs an organisation called Space Rocks, and I was talking to him about maybe doing a collaboration with him of some kind. His organisation basically is dedicated to bringing together the worlds of science and astronomy with music, and I thought maybe I could create a soundtrack for one of his events. And he started to tell me about the overview effect, and he said, do you know anything about the overview effect? And I said, no, I've never heard of it. And he started to explain to me it's the phenomenon that astronauts experience when they first go into space and they look back at the Earth from space, and they have this very kind of profound moment at which they understand just how insignificant the Earth really is, and therefore by extension how insignificant human beings are in relation to the cosmos. And what was really interesting about that is that he explained to me that some people have a very positive effect, a positive reaction to that, but other people have a very negative reaction to that. And straight away in my head it was like, there's a concept album there. And it almost instantaneously I kind of heard the whole record in my head, and I kind of knew at that moment that it needed to be something in the long form. In other words, an uninterrupted single piece of music. So I went home, and in the space of about 6 to 8 weeks, I pretty much sketched out the whole piece and played a lot of the basic tracks that you hear on the final album. So yeah, it came together. I wish it was always that easy. It's not always that easy. But I wouldn't say easy, but it was easier than perhaps some of my other records have been, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the big thing with this album is the fact that it's just 2 tracks. So did that structure present any like specific challenges when you approached it, in terms of like, you know, you're not thinking like a traditional, say, 10-track album here, it's just 2 sides?
So I think, you know, when you're working on a very long piece of music, it allows a lot more thematic development. So for example, the first piece, well, I think of the album as having 2 sides, like an old vinyl record, because I'm old and I grew up with vinyl. So the first side, almost all of the music material is derived from the same 19-note melody, which has a kind of bass line that goes with it. And although you wouldn't be conscious of that when you're listening to the piece, it is true to say that almost all of the music material on that record comes from that same theme. So that's something you can do over a long piece. You can kind of look at the same thematic motif from many different directions, different time signatures, different keys, and that's what Objects Outlive Us grew to be. This 23-minute track, essentially derived from one musical idea. Although hopefully, you know, it doesn't feel like that when you listen to it.
Yeah. All right, Miles, I'll give you a question. Okay. So what was your biggest technical or creative challenge in bringing the vast scale of the overview to life in a 42-minute film?
I think just definitely the numbers. When you're trying to represent space in a, let's say, scientifically accurate way, the scale of the universe is ridiculous. It's huge. We can't even really comprehend how big it is. And so, you know, taking all those numbers and data, you know, we're talking about scale of the universe and how that actually has, you know, the data of how large these, you know, objects are. There's so many zeros. It's crazy. And so trying to put those numbers into any sort of software to actually represent like the comparisons between these objects visually, it gets to a point where the software, literally the screen starts to break up and it can't display it properly because it can't work out like coordinates in that sort of scale.
Yeah. So you've collaborated with Stephen before on the last album. How did your past projects shape your approach with this one?
Oh, I think with that, it's always like the scale of the imagery that I'm trying to produce. So previously in the Harmony Codex and Impossible Tightrope, I mean, Impossible Tightrope especially, I was trying to create these landscapes that, you know, were just the camera was flying through and just taking on this really wild roller coaster. And so I was really trying to produce large landscapes, trying to make them look as, you know, immersive and detailed as possible. And then now it was just trying to translate that idea of doing landscapes in 3D to translate it to space and try to create, you know, other worlds in space. Whereas in Impossible Tightrope, we're pretty much on Earth for those sorts of locations that we're on. Now it was taking out into space and trying to imagine what these other worlds would be like.
Easy.
Yeah.
Easy, straightforward.
Yeah.
Stephen, were there specific astronaut accounts or scientific insights that influenced the lyrics?
Well, interestingly enough, the kind of account that really jumps out when you read accounts of people that have experienced the overview effect, the one that really leaps out is William Shatner, Captain Kirk himself, who's boldly been to all these different universes and galaxies. And his reaction was quite surprising, because William Shatner, when he went into space and he experienced the overview effect, he said that all he saw was death and nothingness and emptiness. And I found that really interesting, that you could have such an extreme negative response to seeing the Earth from space. And I think a lot of what it kind of brought home to me is that it depends what you bring to the table. So it depends on your agenda. If you're, for example, if you're someone that believes in God, I imagine you would have a very different response to the overview effect than someone who's very much, you know, an atheist like myself, because you're, in a sense, all your kind of views on life are being challenged by the fact you're understanding the universe doesn't care about Earth. It's one of trillions of planets in trillions of galaxies. So I think a lot of it does depend on what you bring to the table. But that was fascinating to me, that someone like, you know, William Shatner could have such an extremely pessimistic, depressing reaction to the overview. I think if it had just been basically a series of accounts about how it's so amazing, it's so beautiful, and it's so awe-inspiring to see the Earth from space, I think I would have had less interest in it as a possible subject to explore. But it was the fact that there was this kind of diversity of reaction to the phenomenon that I found the most captivating and really wanted me to explore it.
Yeah. Were there any musical ideas or experiments that you tried for the album that didn't make the final cut? Yes,
in fact, in the deluxe edition, book edition, there's a 12-minute sequence of music called Unused Objects, which is about 12 minutes of music that I just rejected from. I mean, Objects Outlive Us, originally the track was about 38 minutes long. So, but I always do that. I always end up, I start off with something far too long and I basically prune it back over a period of time to be something hopefully that bears up to repeated listenings. And in that process, there's always things that get kind of dropped by the wayside. Not necessarily because they're bad. You know, one of the things I always remember is a lot of directors, film directors, say they cut scenes from movies, and they'll sometimes cut the scene and they'll say, it was my favourite scene in the whole movie, but it just interrupted the momentum of the whole thing. And I think there's an element of that too. Some of my favourite pieces of music I dropped just because it just somehow just didn't flow the way I wanted it to.
Was there a moment making this album that pushed you out of your creative comfort zone a little bit?
Not really. No, I think I've got to the point now. I mean, I always love to challenge myself with every project. I don't like the idea of repeating myself at all, but I think I've got to the point now where I know that whatever I do will sound like me. So I no longer kind of analyse what I'm doing. So I'm bringing in pop, I'm bringing in electronic, I'm bringing in ambient, I'm bringing in metal, progressive rock, post-punk. It's all kind of coming in a way that I don't overanalyze it anymore. I don't kind of, you know, try to intellectualize what it is I'm doing. And I think of all the records I've made, this is the one that I made in a way that was almost completely intuitive. I didn't have any great plan for it. I knew that I wanted to create this long continuum of music about the overview effect, but I didn't second guess bringing together all these elements. And I think that was something I learned from doing the Harmony Codex, the previous record. Even though that was 11 separate pieces, they were all over the place stylistically. But I think I learned from that I can do all these different things, and ultimately it all just sounds like me anyway. Even though sometimes I wish that wasn't the case. I wish I could, confront the expectations of the audience in a more radical way. So they'll say, "Wow, never heard him do anything like that before." But I think I've kind of made my peace with the fact that everything I do sounds like me.
Yeah.
So I don't have to worry about the kind of stylistic juxtaposition of all these different elements somehow hanging together. I think they just do, because I love them all. I love all those different approaches.
Yeah. The film and the album touch on humanity's place in the universe. Did working on the album shift your own perspective on that topic?
It's interesting because I think when I did the album, when I was making the album, I kind of approached it like an idiot, by which I mean I didn't really try and do too much scientific research. I wanted to approach it from a very human perspective. I mean, ultimately, I think like a lot of creative expression that is on the surface about space and the universe, it's really always about humanity, isn't it? It's always that existential question about where do we fit in, what are we for, And I think I wanted to approach it from a similar point of view of not doing too much in terms of scientific. In fact, Miles did a lot more scientific research. He went much further down that sort of route of scientific rigor than I ever did, because you had to, right? You had to visualize these various cosmic, and I didn't. I mean, I was just really writing an album essentially about human beings and our place in the universe, this kind of infinitesimally small place that we occupy in the universe. So it's been interesting having to be talking about these things post making of the record. I'm learning a lot more than actually I knew at the time I was making the record, if that makes sense. So I have even more of a sense of perspective than I did, watching Miles' film, for example, have even more of a sense of perspective than I did at the time.
Yeah. So, Miles, the film attempts to give us a fresh look at space in a way we haven't seen it before. What kind of tools and techniques did you rely on to bring it to life?
First off, with visuals being something that we haven't seen before in space. I mean, you've been talking with Hayo, the artist, Hayo Muller, who's done all of the booklet artwork. Some absolutely fantastic artwork in there, which I was able to have a look at ahead of time when making the film. Stephen was talking with Hayo during that process about how to really create a new sense of space visuals for the record. And Hayo knocked it out of the park. He's done an absolutely fantastic job.
Amazing.
So having all of that and being able to speak to Hayo as well and about that creative process that he went through, I almost feel like a lot of the hard work was done by Hayo in kind of working out that almost visual language. And I wanted to pull little bits of that for the second part, which was a little bit more motion graphics based, definitely at the start of the second part. And so with that, I wanted it to be a representation of space that kind of brought in some of the science and the data, showed how objects move around in space, but really just try not to fall into the common tropes of we see in science fiction films all the time. And so it was trying to produce something that was maybe in my own style, but that still matched the music.
I've noticed a lot of people here in the chat are asking if this film and if you could do a gig at the Sphere in Vegas. Which is obviously, pretty amazing.
The Sphere is an incredible looking venue because it's completely 360 degrees, screens. And so I think the challenge in delivering for a venue like that is that you've got so much more screen to be able to deliver for. I think the resolution is huge. And so, of course, we're really trying to produce something very immersive with what we're trying to create. And so we're looking at, potential ways of doing that. Part of doing the cinema screenings was a huge part of trying to put the audience in a very immersive location. The BFI IMAX show, the largest screen in the UK, that was an incredible way to watch it. And so during the production of the film, I always had this idea of immersive in mind. That was the word that seems to be keep coming up these days. Creating an immersive experience for the viewer. And so that was definitely a kind of like in my head while making it. I've done 360 music videos in the past where it's sort of like VR, but you've got imagery all the way around you. There's definitely a little bit of that for what we did. There was a showing at L Acoustics in London where we did a 270 degree version of part one, And so, yeah, like we've got ways of showing this in different ways, and I think we're interested to sort of see what kind of locations are out there and what the possibilities are for showing a film that's not only created for just one screen, but also to be presented in different ways as well. So, yeah, potentially VR, potentially, well, maybe Sphere, I don't know, but we'll see what we can do, really.
Yeah.
But,
I think the problem with screening it at the Sphere is not so much what Miles is talking about. It's more like the fact that I'm not Taylor Swift and I can't sell 25,000 tickets. But it's a nice dream anyway. It's a nice dream. Yeah.
So obviously we had the big premiere at the BFI IMAX. What was it like for you personally, Miles, to see the work on that screen? I mean, it must have been pretty remarkable.
I mean, I've been fortunate enough now to have my work in cinemas, and going from just online delivery and YouTube and social media to now putting a film in front of people where you've got the audience there. It's a totally different experience, and I think it's just absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much, Stephen, for taking the film and putting it into that setting, because that's really as a filmmaker the highest level of anything that you can dream of. So yes, it's been an absolutely incredible experience, and seeing it for the first time with that test screening was just mind blowing. Just the scale of it just totally changes what you're looking at, and so creating the film, I always had that in mind, that it's going to be larger format, and so where I'm positioning certain objects and framing, it all has that larger format in mind. But of course, you've got to think about all the different places that it could be viewed from. But it is primarily for the cinema.
Yeah. So, Stephen, how did you recharge creatively after finishing something as intense as the overview?
That's a good question. I think one of the constants of my career has always been, every time I make a record, I'm like, okay, that's it. There's nothing left. The well is dry. I've got nothing left to offer creatively. And so far, touch wood, I've always managed to prove myself wrong. And obviously one of the things that my listeners will know about me is that I don't like the idea of more of the same. I don't like that thing. Even though some fans probably want more of the same the whole time, for me it's important to always trying to move into different areas, do different things. If not move forward, at least move sideways into doing different things. So I don't quite know what I'll do after the overview, but I've obviously got a big thing between now and whatever that might be, which is this tour. So right now I'm focusing very much on the first tour I've done in 7 years. So I haven't been able to tour the last 3 albums. So this is kind of consuming all of my efforts right now, is preparing to make this tour hopefully as mind-blowing as the album and the film, to really justify all of the creativity that's gone into the piece of music and the recording of it and the film, to try and now take that into the live context. So I'm confident that something will present itself, something will suggest itself, but I don't know what that's likely to be right now. And many things can change between now and whenever I start that.
That's one question we've had a lot in the chat, by the way, which is people asking if the film will be shown at the tour.
Yes, so the film will also be... so the second half of the show is going to be a complete performance of the overview with Miles' film projected as the band perform it. So everyone at some point, hopefully, that comes along to the shows will get the chance to see the film on a bigger scale, as it were.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I've just got a couple more questions now, and then we'll wrap up. I noticed I had a number of people asking this, so I've attributed it just to obviously just to me. Are you aware of the band Blood Incantation, who released an album, Absolute Elsewhere, late last year? It had 2 songs, and it was also about space. So it's a similar album there.
I am aware of Blood Incantation. I did not know their album was about space.
Yeah.
But as far as I know, they're very much in the metal genre, right?
Yeah. But what's interesting about this album is that it's both like a kind of death metal album, but it's also got sections that sound like Pink Floyd and Tangerine Dream as well. So it's really a mix, and it's just an album that a lot of people are talking about.
It's just an interesting parallel. I mean, I've worked with Blood Incantation, they're great guys.
Yeah.
You've worked with them?
Yeah, I've done a couple of videos with them.
Not like that, hopefully.
No, not that.
Okay. It's something you're not telling me, Miles. You know. I will check them out for sure.
Yeah. Excellent. So, what's one album or project from your past that you think may deserve more attention than it's probably got?
All of them?
Yeah.
No, I mean, you know, I've kind of resigned myself now to being kind of eternally what you might call a cult artist, and I kind of understand that one of the unwritten sort of clauses in the contract of being able to do exactly what you want, and basically that's what I've done. You know, I'm extremely fortunate in my career because I've never really compromised. Even when I was making pop music, it was because it's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I think I've been very fortunate in that sense of never having to compromise whatever my creative instinct took me towards. And I understand that also in doing that, and also being someone that's constantly changing and doing different things, I understand that part of the contract there is that you will lose some fans, gain some new fans, lose some fans, gain some new fans. So you kind of eternally remain a cult artist. And I think as a result of that, there are certain albums I feel like, you know, I was immensely proud of the Future Bites, for example, but it came out in the middle of COVID. The timing was terrible. An album that kind of was about alienation, that the artist feels from his work at a time when everyone wanted to feel closer together because of COVID. Terrible timing. And it was a record that really needed a lot of convincing of some of the older fans that, you know, that was worth listening to because it was a very stylistically a very different thing for me. So maybe that one, maybe Future Bites. I think time will reveal it to be, if not something that people love, a very important part of my journey, that record.
Yeah. So you've always said that Pink Floyd is part of your musical DNA, being your favourite band. We recently, there was the announcement that you'd done the Dolby Atmos remix of Live in Pompeii.
Well, and stereo.
And stereo, yeah. So what was that experience like? I mean, that must have been remarkable, right?
Amazing, but also quite daunting, you know, because as a fan of Pink Floyd, I'm very aware of the expectations of Pink Floyd fans and how everyone has a different kind of idea of what they want, perhaps what they want from a mix of Pompeii. So, for example, I took the view that the band are playing outside. It's going to be a very dry, very upfront sound, very little ambience. And I've already seen some people complaining that they think there's not enough ambience to it. So, you know, for me, it's wanting to do justice to the band as they were that day in the middle of the desert in Italy, playing really what had been their repertoire for many years at that point. And in many cases, I think there were definitive versions of those tracks. So I'm more worried about what the Pink Floyd fans will make of it than I am about what my fans will make of the overview. Because I know that with Floyd, the fans are so demanding, as they should be. This is one of the great canons in the history of rock music. But I hope most of them at least feel like I've done the right thing by them,
Yeah. All right, last question. What do you hope that fans take away from experiencing the overview as both an album and as a film?
That I think you can still make music that does not underestimate the listener. That you can make music which asks them to engage with something in the same way they would engage with a piece of cinema for a long period of time. And I think that's one of the problems I have with a lot of modern pop music is it completely underestimates the ability of the listener to engage with something for more than 15 seconds. So in a way, I'm happy to be the alternative. You know, if that makes me an alternative artist, then bring it on. I'll be the alternative. Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you so much for everyone for tuning in and for leaving their comments in the chat. And hope you enjoy the album. It's going to be available for 48 hours on Veeps if you want to rewatch the album and the film. So enjoy.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy it. Bye now.